Not too long ago, I was about 1 mile from here, near Whitehall, at a Tommy Robinson protest to see what the crack was all about. Picture the scene. You have people coming in from even Scotland, Wales, and all the parts of England to hear people speak on Tommy Robinson's behalf. You have a crowd desperate to be wild up. They want a fight. They want to hear someone to get them angry. And yet, what is the best rhetoric that the speakers could come up with? Labour our pants. That is the state of rhetoric in our country. That the best they can come up with are labourers' pants. Clearly, there is a problem. And the problem isn't just with, perhaps we might say disparagingly, football hooligans speaking, but even with politicians. If you listen into Prime Minister's questions or any parliamentary debate, you don't exactly get high-flown rhetoric. You get quite plain, unconvincing truisms, people speaking to you half as good than someone in the pub could speak to you. And so clearly there is a problem. And the problem is people don't know how to speak. People aren't orators. And I don't claim that I know how to speak, but what I'll give to you today is the theory of oratory according to Cicero. Now, you might have some objections to this. You might say, like many of the saints do, that your eloquence should be the love of God. Why do you study turns of phrases? Why do you study rhetorical techniques? Surely the love of God alone should be your eloquence in front of other people. Now, this may be true in a sermon, but as soon as it comes to a question of politics, just because the audience might think you have the love of God in you doesn't count too much, because you might be well-meaning, no one takes that away from you, but you might have some really bad ideas. Okay, so it's not just your intention, but your ideas. And regardless, yes, there are many saints, and in the lives of saints you read how they didn't study rhetoric or things like that. However, there are saints that did, such as many of the early church fathers, Saint Basil, Saint Gregory Nazianzen, Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Many of these saints actually studied at the schools where the pagans would study and learn much of the pagan wisdom, and some of that is rhetoric. And besides, our Lord is actually, believe it or not, in his simple way, an excellent rhetorician. I mean, when he said with the coin, or show me the coin, and there's the face of Caesar, then give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's, is actually very, very persuading. Second of all, there might be an objection of why are we learning from Cicero? Why are you explaining to me something which a pagan taught? Well, the proof really, the legitimacy is that it's not a question of dogma. Oratory is very much a means to get a point across. It's a tool. You can use oratory to persuade people that men aren't men and that we should abolish the death penalty. But you can also use oratory for many good reasons, such as acquitting the innocent in court or persuading men of a good course of action. So it's very much a tool that can be used for good or for evil. And today I'm going to teach you the tool, and you've just got to make sure you don't use it for bad means. But besides all of that, if you read the encyclicals of the popes, you'll notice they have a very distinct style. And the style is actually the style of Cicero. There's an anecdote that when I think some of the Anglican bishops wrote to Pope Leo XIII protesting against his decree that the Anglican orders are invalid, he said, if only my bishops could write as well as these ones. well, obviously they're not real bishops, but you get the point. And you can bet that they were writing in a Ciceronian style. Now, the problem of morality is with oratory is certainly a question to consider. Plato, for example, famously disparaged sophists and rhetoricians as being liars. He said, philosophy, it's where it's at. Why, to know the truth should be your concern, not making arguments. However, what Cicero shows in his writing is, well, firstly, the first point to make is Plato is actually very eloquent, even though he disparages those who teach eloquence. But second of all, Cicero insists that oratory is a tool. It's a tool, and yes, it can be used for bad, to deceive people, to trick people, as Plato was concerned, but it can also be used to help people. And it would be ideal if you could just speak in a straightforward manner. It would be ideal if you could speak plain English like you would when you're going to the shops, when you're speaking to friends. However, in other words, it would be great if you could speak like the common man. But the problem is that the common man has his brain in all these knots and twists and turns that sometimes it requires you to use turns of phrases to untangle the knot in his mind. So I hope that covers the objections. One final objection might be, well, why do I need to hear about public speaking? Why do I need to hear about oratory? Because it's not my strength. It's not my strength. That's for other people to do. Well, I'd say that everyone has the ability to write clearly and to speak loudly. So long as you can write clearly, so long as you can read what you write, and so long as you can speak above a whisper, to some extent you can do oratory. You can take part in debates. You can defend the truth. And so whilst there are certainly natural talents, there are certainly questions of intelligence which help someone to be a good orator, that doesn't mean that you can't acquire from this talk a basic understanding to speak well. And besides, by knowing the tricks, you'll be able to see them when other people use them on you. So that deals with the objections on learning about oratory. And as I said, the importance is tremendous. If you can speak persuasively on a matter, you can take a crowd of people and get them to agree with you on whatever you want. That's the ideal, to get a rabble of people to just agree with you with whatever you want. Now, that's a very big power, and if used for good, it can have tremendous effects, as Cicero did in his lifetime. But it's not just a positive element of being able to convince people. We might say it also has the negative element of being able to defend those policies or those people who are unjustly accused. And in fact, when Luther started blaspheming God and writing scurrilous pamphlets against the Catholic Church, St. Thomas More actually wrote quite rhetorically charged pamphlets in return. Because if you see someone slinging mud and you see the other guy just, speaking normally, not writing with any emotion, then that has the psychological effect that the other guy is right. So sometimes when someone just starts talking rubbish but sounding really clever in the way he does it, those who have the truth, because people are quite simple, they also need to speak in a way or write in a way which matches the vigor and eloquence of the other man. So I'm just going to pass out a handout now, which is very basic, which will help you understand what I'm going to do this talk. But it's split into two parts. Firstly, how to go about writing a speech. And then secondly, exercises you can do and practice you can do to become a better orator. Okay. the process of making a speech. Now, in ancient rhetorical theory, there were 5 parts of making a speech. There was the inventio, which is thinking out the material. There is the dispositio, which is arranging the material. There is the elocutio, which is finding the words to express the material. There is memoria, and there's a typo on the handout, which is remembering your speech. And then finally, there is the actio, which is finally delivering your speech. So I'm going to go through these steps one by one so that you know how to go about writing a speech and delivering it. 1, invention, or inventio in the Latin, thinking out the material. Now, there are 3 types of arguments to consider. Rational or logical arguments, emotional arguments, and arguments of character. Now, this might surprise you. You might think, well, the only arguments to make are rational arguments. Why are you talking about emotional arguments? Well, one political commentator likes to say facts don't care about your feelings. But I might say emotions don't care about the facts. If you can get someone really emotional and wild up, then they just forget about the facts. You've convinced them. And so lots of young men have this maybe simplistic and naive approach to debating, where they make it about facts and logic. And they just focus on the facts and logic. And actually, that's a very handicapped way of giving a speech. Okay, what do I mean? Let's take the motion, this house believes we should have no immigration. This house believes we should have no immigration. Now, you want to come up with 2 or 3 overriding arguments. One might be that with immigration, the indigenous people don't benefit economically. You might make another argument that says immigration undermines the unity within a country. Let's say you're going for those 2 approaches. Then you'll come up with the arguments that support those 2 grander arguments. I don't think there's much to say here. You just need to use your reason. And obviously, you get better with practice, with reading, and if you have a modicum of intelligence. One point to say, and this comes from legal theory, is that there are in causam arguments and extra causam arguments. Arguments which deal with the matter at hand and arguments which are beside the matter. For example, there is a Cicero speech called the Pro Melone. Now, I'll give you the context. You have 2, I'm using anachronistic language, but you have 2 mob bosses. You have the mob boss, Milo, and you have the mob boss, Claudius. And the 2 mob bosses sort of support 2 different factions of the nobility of 2 factions within the Senate. Now, it happens that these 2 gangs cross each other one day, and it turns out that, what's his name? Not Catiline. Claudius gets killed, and Claudius the other mob boss, and Milo comes out alive. Now, Cicero's main argument is that Claudius ambushed Milo, and Milo acted in self-defense. It's a self-defense argument. Now, that is legal, because obviously the law allows you to kill another person if that person is threatening your life. So that would be the in causam argument. The extra causam argument is, well, even if Milo wasn't acting in self-defense, he did just sort of get rid of the biggest menace to our country. So for that reason, we should acquit him. See what I mean? Another extra causam argument he uses, well, he doesn't quite use, but he could have used, is think of all the good things that Milo has done for this country in the past. When he was tribune, which is this political office, when he was tribune, he did this and that. I mean, do we really want to punish him now? Can't we, paper over this, this perhaps legally dubious event? In another case, there's this governor who completely extorts and robs the people he is in charge over. And the orator at the time, Mark Antony, but not the famous Mark Antony, the ancestor Mark Antony, he rips open the governor's chest and says, look at his wounds that he has taken for Rome. Would you send in exile a man who has shed his blood for our country? Yeah? It's got nothing to do with extortion. It's got nothing to do with the defense of, well, did he rob the people or did he not? It's just this guy is a national hero. This guy has done good for our country. Why are you punishing such a man? So that's an extra chiasm argument. It's thinking outside the box. It's extra legal. It's appealing to something which isn't actually to do with the question as such, but can be used as a defense to sort of paper over the person's guilt. Okay. That's reason. Emotional arguments. So I've just, in this hypothetical situation, I've just made the argument that immigration undermines the unity of the country. But I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to paint a picture of, I mean, who's been stabbed recently in England? Any names? Let's call him John Smith. Right. I'm going to paint to you a picture of John Smith. I'm going to paint you a picture of this promising boy who went to school, who was well liked by his friends, who was loved by his family, who had such a bright future ahead of him, who could have done great things for this country. I'm going to paint you a picture of his mother crying at home, who doesn't have her son to comfort her. His face was so lively, he had such joy, and now he's there in the ground, a corpse. I'm going to tell you about the injustice, the crime, that our government has let in foreigners who kill our own people. Yeah? You get the gist. So that's just, it's complete emotion, and yet it's very effective. In fact, you could say it's more effective than the rational argument. I'm going to, then there's all these techniques which we'll go on to later on in my talk, but, the shepherds are not only wolves, no, let me get this right. The shepherds are not only not protecting the sheep, they're actually welcoming the wolves into the sheepfold. Yeah? You get the gist, I think. So, as I said, facts don't care about your feelings, yes, but feelings don't care about the facts. And people often have no idea, they don't remember the arguments. I mean, if you listen to Germans speaking in interviews about what they remember about Hitler, they don't remember what he said, really. They just remember this German speaking to them passionately, and they just felt, they loved it. They felt that he cared for Germany, that he wanted what was best for them, that he stood for something that was right. They remember the feeling. They don't remember the arguments. So don't underestimate emotion. And of course, you can't be, for lack of a better word, autistic. You've got to have some understanding of human psychology. So it does help to have not some background in philosophy, but to at least consider what makes people tick. Even St. Thomas Aquinas really knew human psychology very well. So an orator would read certainly what St. Thomas Aquinas has to say about the human passions, like anger, fear, and he'll use that to his advantage. And to be more specific on the emotional argument, there are two main emotions that the orator wants to evoke, and these are pity and indignation. Pity and indignation. And a good speech will at least get the audience on the verge of tears, or get them crying, or get the audience on the verge of wanting to start a riot. If you can do that, you are an orator. Okay. Now, as well as so at this stage, you're coming up with your rational points, you're coming up with the emotional points you might want to bring up, and finally the character. Back to this example of immigration. You want to paint the speaker arguing for immigration as a traitor. You want to paint him as a hypocrite. I mean, for example, if it was gun control, if gun control was the question, you might remark how this senator here is advocating that. Obviously, this is more of a question in America. This senator here is advocating that you don't have a right to bear weapons, but he lives on a private road with armed guards, right? So you're going to paint him as a hypocrite, as someone who cares only for himself, as someone who doesn't care about you, and you're going to paint yourself as a virtuous man. You're going to paint yourself as someone who only wants what's best for everyone else, who doesn't count the cost, who doesn't think of himself. You get the gist. So again, people get this wrong. They say don't make ad hominem attacks. Ad hominem attacks are stupid because the other person will just say, well, you're attacking me and you're not focusing on the issue. No, ad hominem attacks are really, really good if you can get away with it. And it takes a good orator to get away with it. We'll go on to the techniques later on, but just to give you one, the Greek for it is apophasis. And that's where you say, I'm not going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, about this man's past. I'm not going to sling mud against his reputation, although you well know that I could. You know I could speak to you about his wife and his girlfriend, about his children, how many there are, I cannot remember, and about how he votes whichever way the wind blows. But I'm not going to do that. He may choose to do that, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on the facts, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to speak about the issue at hand, and you will see that reason is on my side. Yeah? You've just completely destroyed him, and yet you have the appearance of not wanting to, you see? So you've got to know how to get away with it. And it is completely legitimate. I mean, if we're doing an LFSPN disputation, no one really knows who you are. You haven't had a career. But, if you're a politician, it's perfectly acceptable to flatter yourself, to speak about your achievements, to boast, so long as you do it with mildness, so long as you show gratitude, so long as you come across as affable to the audience, so long as you avoid aggression, bitterness, and litigiousness. In other words, as long as you come off well, you can slander the other guy as much as you want, and you can praise yourself as much as you want, so long as you come off well. And in fact, you should do that. Now, there are times when you might be up against someone with a very good reputation. You might be up against someone about whom lots of people say, well, I mean, if he thinks that, it's probably right. If he believes that, it's probably the truth. He has such integrity. He has such an intelligence. And still, it's good of you to undermine him. I'll take an example from Cicero's career. There's a speech called the Pro Marina, in which Cicero has just passed the law against bribery, and 6 months later, he's defending the consul, prime minister sort of. He's defending the consul who's about to come in on a charge of bribery. So the prosecutor is someone called Cato. Now, Cato is a byword for integrity. In fact, in some circles, people might say, oh, he's another Cato, as in he's another guy with scrupulous morals and integrity. And so Cicero's there, he's basically being a hypocrite, and he's against the man with the most integrity in the Roman Republic. What's he going to do? How on earth is he going to slander, well, not slander, but how on earth is he going to undermine the audience's trust and trust with Cato? What he does is he just makes fun of his stoicism. So Cato is a Stoic, which you might think, oh, that's virtuous, okay, good. But Stoicism has some funny ideas. The Stoic believes that there is no difference between, let's say, a venial sin and a mortal sin, although that's Catholic language. They believe that For me to steal someone else's drink is as bad for me to betray my country. If something's bad, it's bad, and it's equally bad. If you don't do what's right, then it's bad, and there's no better, worse, no distinction, it's all bad. So Cicero makes fun of it. Cicero makes fun about how, us Romans, we like to throw a feast. We like to share things with our friends. But Cato the Stoic says that's bribery. Cato the Stoic says that's influencing the voter base. So if we were all Stoics, well, there'd be no feasts, there'd be no banquets, because that might be seen as bribery. Yeah? So he undermines him on his Stoicism. On the very thing which people admire him for, Cicero undermines him for. So you've just got to be creative with this. And again, these character arguments, they're not the meat of what you want to say, but they certainly do help you. Like a cake. The main thing with the cake is how nice the cake is. But if it's got a soggy bottom, it's better if it doesn't have it's better if you have a crust. So too, it's better if you can disparage the other guy. It's not the argument, but it helps. Okay. So to summarize with the first part of making a speech, invention. Come up with your arguments. Arguments of reason, arguments of emotion, and arguments of character. And of course, know your audience, know what's going to work with your audience. For example, if you were a don at an Oxford college and there was a debate about whether to raise the sodomite flag, the best line of argument might not be, God is going to strike us down if we put it up. This is offensive. You might not even mention the sodomite flag in your entire speech. You might just talk about how on our college has only ever flown the Union flag, St. George's flag, and the Oriole flag colours banner, I don't know what it's called. And you just might focus on that. And not even really mention about how the LGBT stuff is completely degenerate, it's bad for the individual, they die young, they get all these diseases, it's completely immoral, da-da-da-da. You might just focus on how, well, before we've honoured the college, the king, the country, and now there's people's preference of what they do in the evenings. That might be your general gist. So you've got to choose your arguments depending on who your audience are and what you think works. Different situations might call for different arguments. And a good orator is able to argue both sides of the case. So it's very good at this stage if you think, well, if I was in the other person's shoes, what would I argue for? And to really do your best, to think of their arguments, so then you know how to combat them, and you figure out where their weak spots are, and you really attack their weak spots. Okay, so know the case very well. Consider the circumstances, the audience, who you're up against. Make your arguments, come up with them, select which ones you think are best. Don't neglect the emotional aspect, be creative. And when you do make your character and emotion arguments, you want to obfuscate, I like that word, you want to obfuscate that you're making such arguments. You want to make it seem that all you care about is reason. You're virtuous, you're thoughtful, that's the impression you want to give. Number 2, arrangement, or in the Latin dispositio, which deals with the subsequent ordering of the material. Now, William Cobbett, whom I respect and about whom a talk was given, said that if the ideas are clear in your mind, when you start writing, the order will naturally present themselves for you. And whilst that's true, and whilst your arguments, the facts of the case should really lead how you structure your argument, nevertheless, I'll present to you the theory on what makes a good structure, and that might help you with your speeches. So first of all, you have an exordium, or an introduction. Second of all, and this is optional, you have an oratio, or an oration. Third of all, you have your argumentatio, your arguments. And then finally, you have your peroratio, where we get the word peroration, so your conclusion. And I'll deal with these 4 sections one by one. First of all, the exordium. There are three things you need to do at the beginning of a speech. You need to make the audience attentive, attentus. You need to make them well disposed to you, bene volens. And you need to give them an understanding of the relevant context. Make them doctors. For example, in Cicero's speech, which really made him a well-known name in Rome, his first speech, called the Pro Roscio, Rome's just gone through a period of a dictatorship in which the law courts have been closed. So this is the first case, and it's a case of parricide. So Cicero's defending a guy who's accused of killing his own father. This is the first case after a dictatorship. And those who are prosecuting are like the Dominic Cummings to Boris Johnson. Yeah, so imagine Boris Johnson was the dictator, and like the prosecutor's Dominic Cummings. So, and in this dictatorship, he was killing guys. So you're defending a client against basically the cronies of the previous dictatorship that's just finished. And Cicero's a nobody. So what does he start his speech with? He says, ladies and gentlemen, I'll stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a young orator. I'm new to pleading. So if I show any arrogance, if I show any disrespect, attribute that to my youth, not to my intention. The reason I have to defend this man is because everyone else is scared. None of the orators would do it, and because I do not even wish to give this man a defense, but I just want to uphold the principle that every man should at least have an advocate. So I'm here just to be an advocate for this man. I'm not even here to defend him, just to give him some representation. And again, I'm very young, I am very youthful, so I apologize if I show any offense. Okay, that's basically the gist of how he opens the speech. And immediately, he's a young guy. He's new. He's inexperienced. Everyone loves. Okay, fine. I'll listen to him. What's he got to say? And don't forget, the crime is parricide. So people are looking at his defendant like he killed his father. Let's lynch him now. That's the attitude in the jurors. So he makes this point of I'm not even here really to defend him. But every Roman citizen deserves the right to representation. So I'm just here to make sure he gets that right, and I'm here to go home. And then he completely wipes the floor. An analogy might be someone, his friends invite him to play poker, and he's like, oh, how do you play? Oh, yeah, okay, I get it. Oh, I'm not sure. Oh, do I do this? Da, da, da. And he wins all the money because he just bluffed everyone. That's basically what Cicero did. So there are different means to make people well disposed to you. One of them is humour. So if the guy before who spoke was just really boring, it's really good to start with a joke. And in fact, one prelate did this all the time. Who was it? You've probably listened to his talks at one point. Fulton Sheen. Bishop Sheen. He always starts with a joke. Always. And there's a reason, because you hear a joke and everyone's like, okay, I'm listening now. Okay, yeah. And that's the gist that you want to go for in your introduction. Another thing you want to do in your introduction is remove prejudices. And actually, the word prejudice comes from this subsection of the exordium. That this section in oratorical theory was called the praejudicium, the prejudgment, because people have a prejudgment of whether your guy was guilty or innocent, or whether a certain course of action should be followed. And you've got to remove those prejudgments before you make your arguments. So if you make your arguments to a hostile crowd, they might not even listen to you. A great example of this is in Mark Antony's speech in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I have not come to praise Caesar, but to bury him. Okay, well, we're not going to hear him praise Caesar. All right, he's just here to bury him. All right, he'll give his speech. He's just going to talk, and then he was good to me. Okay, he's going to talk about how Caesar was a friend to him. Okay, so the audience like, all right, and then what does Mark Antony do? he flatters Brutus. And Brutus, I can't remember the speech exactly, but calls him an honourable man, calls all of them honourable men who have let him speak. Okay, so Brutus, he's giving respect to Brutus. He's just here to bury Caesar. He's not here to praise him. Okay, all right, I'll let him speak. But once Mark Antony has achieved that, he starts needling away at Brutus and starts riling the crowd up. So read that speech. That is an excellent example of how to make an audience willing to listen to you and how to remove prejudices. Okay. One other thing you might want to do in your introduction is characterize the case under one heading. What do I mean by that? Let's say, back to this example of gun control, you might make this a question of, as they often do, about the Constitution. It's all about the Constitution. It's about upholding the rights of the Constitution. And in your introduction, you might say that over and over again in different ways. Do we uphold the Constitution or do we not uphold the Constitution? Well, of course, I want to uphold the Constitution. I'm an American. I love America. Great. And you don't mention gun crime at all. You never mention gun crime in your speech, and so you're preparing the audience's minds about, really, as an American, do I like the Constitution or do I not like the Constitution? Well, I like the Constitution. Okay, well then you should agree with me, and that's how you characterize the debate. You make it about the Constitution, or you might decide to completely frame the debate as self-defense. You might paint how if you have a gun, then you can defend yourself, and all these people who died would have survived if they had a right to a gun. So you'll notice that often, if you ever took part in debating at school, or have been to debates, a good orator will, whatever point is their strong point, they'll make the whole debate about that point, and they'll completely omit and completely forget about what's unfavourable to them. And inexperienced debaters they're like, oh, well, this is my weak point. Okay, this is my weak point, so I really need to argue about this. I need to come up with a good argument about this, and really focus on showing to people why, even though this is harder to argue for, nevertheless, I'm still right. That is most of the time a mistake. Just ignore your weak points. Don't just focus on your strong points. Okay, so that's the exordium. It's usually quite brief, and in effect, what you're doing is, if your arguments are hitting the ball, the instruction is that perfect setup. You're just getting it ready. You're making the audience prepared. You've sown the seeds in their minds, so you can hit it out the park. Next, the narration. Now, really, this comes from legal theory, because if you're convicting a man, you're a prosecutor and convicting a man of murder, then obviously you're going to need to give the story of how he did it, right? While on the other hand, the defense wouldn't give a narration because nothing happened, because my guy's innocent. So what story have I got to tell you? So oftentimes there's no need to give any sort of story or narration. But sometimes it's helpful. For example, in the previous disputation, this House supports reform at the upcoming local elections. I said we shouldn't. And at the beginning of my speech, I just told the story of Farage. How he's basically, when he was young, he said, "Oh no, I'm not a fascist." How he was always a Tory. How the precursor to the UKIP party were basically breakaway Tories. So he was always a Tory. I didn't mention anything about leaving the EU, because obviously that's his one saving grace. When the other guy might just focus on how Farage was behind a movement which probably did the only good political act in modern politics, that's Britain leaving the EU. I completely skipped over that and then just went from the beginning of UKIP, how he's basically a Tory, to at the beginning of reform, how he basically said that he's open to a pact with the Conservatives. He's even open to becoming Conservative MP. So I painted the story of Farage, and then afterwards my arguments were, this is just the Tories 2.0. So the narration in that case helped me, but skip over the unfavourable details and linger over those details which help you. And there are three things that you want your narration to, three characteristics you want your narration to have. That's brevity, just get to the point, say what you need to say, move on. Clarity, people need to be able to follow you. And plausibility. Notice Cicero doesn't say the truth, he just says plausibility. So it needs to be plausible. And you know, especially blokes, loads of blokes are great at telling a story. So really just tell the story if it helps your argument or whatever you're doing for public speaking. It's good to drop in characterizations and details like what color hat he was wearing, you know, or you know what time of the day it was, or at this point of the day he always had a whiskey or whatever. Like these pieces of characterization are also very good. The tone you want to adopt is one of conversational language, like you're speaking to a mate, nothing high flow, nothing rhetorically fancy. And obviously, although technically you want to have the appearance of neutrality, you're giving the appearance of this is neutral, this is what the facts are, and then I'm going to give my argument. In reality, you're going to make it completely skewed, completely biased. Okay, your introduction, possibly a narration, and thirdly, the meat of your speech, which are your arguments. Now, at the beginning, you want to outline what your arguments are going to be, like in a sentence, like I'm going to make this point, that point, this point. That's really good. Don't forget that when you speak, it's very different compared to when you write something. Because when you write something, people can, you know, go back over. They can refresh their memory. They can see what you said before. But when you're speaking, you said something, and then you're never saying it again. So it's good to say what you're going to say it, and say what you just said. Then you're going to make the arguments for your position, called the confirmatio. And then you're going to rebut against the other position, called the refutatio. And the arguments pro and your rebuttal, it can be either order. Again, it just, you know, whatever's best in the context. As I said before, 2 or 3, don't do 5, 6 separate strands of arguments, it's too much. The audience don't remember it. Rather, what you want to do is 2 or 3, but with lots of elaboration, calling upon precedents of the past, put a bit of emotion, put a bit of character, throw in some anecdotes, look at it from different perspectives. Lots of elaboration, but 2 or 3. And another technique which is helpful is, you know, if because of time or because there are other arguments you could make, but you don't want to make because they're weaker, you just tell them, I could make these arguments, but I'm not going to make them because I don't have time, or because you know, these arguments are a little bit below the belt, so I'm not going to make them. But of course, then in the audience's minds, they actually consider those arguments you say you're not going to make. So you've got it. You win. And don't ignore the weak points. Ignore the weak points. More on this in the next in the next section. But how do you make the arguments, in what manner? Obviously, there are arguments from principles. You give the audience a principle, you defend the principle, you show how the principle means that they should vote a certain way. Very effective is to call upon precedents in the past. Unfortunately, I mean, Britain doesn't have those many precedents of those like heroes that if you say this guy did it, well, it's right. We don't have many guys like that, but you know, there are some. There are some. You could even use precedents in books, like I don't know, Lord of the Rings. Like, you know, Frodo did this in Lord of the Rings, and that was obviously right. So that's basically what's going on here. That's very effective. The other thing that's very effective is using maxims in your argument. If you throw in a maxim, it lends so much credibility. It's unbelievable, really. Like if you can throw in things like, there's more than one way to skin a cat, or I've got to see it to believe it, or an unjust law is no law at all, or time is money. You know, these sorts of maxims, if you can show how that maxim helps your case, it lends so much credibility. Because modern people especially, they don't have a logical, coherent, philosophical system. But what they do have are like certain things that are true. Like, yeah, you say your please and thank yous, you're polite. Yeah, okay. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Yeah, there's more. Yeah, I believe. Yeah, I agree with that. Time is money. Yeah, time is money. Yeah. They just have these individual points which they believe in. So to use them in your arguments, very, very effective. And in general, you want to characterize your arguments not so much as this is what is logical. You know, if we take this premise and that premise and that premise, and we make these deductions and take into consideration these points of context, then this is the right thing to do. You know, that's good with articles addressed to some people. You can have some of that in your speeches. But really, what you want to do is not facts and logics, but you want the audience to say, I like that guy. You want the audience to say, what that guy stands for, I stand for. You want the audience to say, I'm with him. I support what he's got to say. Or, yeah, he's the bad guy, he's the good guy. That's the general effect you want to have on your audience, rather than, you know, because otherwise, if you've got them thinking afterwards, well, yeah, okay, so there's that premise, and then, okay, there's that point to consider. Yeah, then there's that, and so, you know, with some people it works. But it's, you know, you want really in your 10 minutes, in your 20 minutes, in your hour, to get the audience like, I'm with him. He's a good guy. That's what you want. And then, within your argumentation, what order should you put them in? Usually you want to put your more cogent arguments first, and you want to put the more emotionally slanted ones towards the end, and then in your peroration, in your conclusion, you're going to go off on one. You're going to start, you know, spitting at the audience. Okay. So yes, so introduction, narration, arguments, peroration or conclusion. So at this point, you're not going to introduce new arguments, except you might introduce new arguments. But usually when you do so, you've done something clever. So back to the example of the pro marina. Cicero says that my mob boss, Milo, acted in self-defense. Okay, so he spent his whole speech so far saying, this is the principle that I'm going to defend him on. I'm not going to use any other argument that I could use, but I'm not going to use. If you're not convinced by this, if you're not convinced that Claudius laid a trap for Milo and that Milo acted in self-defense and killed him, if you're not convinced of that, don't acquit my guy. If you're not convinced of the self-defense argument, don't acquit my guy. And he makes a big point of that, you know, this is my argument. But then, he's just giving his arguments. In his conclusion, in his, you know, he's doing his final flurry, his final appeal. He suddenly says, and although I've proven to you that my client Milo was acting in self-defense, Milo, though he would be lying, Milo would still have the right to say, I have saved you, Rome. I have saved you from Claudius. I have saved you from internal unrest. And yet I am happy to go into exile, for I see that if you convict me, you are vicious men and not virtuous, and I am not at home. Even if that's in Rome, I am not at home with vicious men. And so even though I saved you, I'm happy to go into exile. Ladies, that is what Milo could say. So what Cicero has done is he's put the public good argument, the extra legal argument, the sort of he's done a good for us even though it was murder argument, in Milo's mouth. So he's still kept the impression, he's still stayed true to his principle that he only wants to argue that Milo acted in self-defense. but he finds a way to sort of impress upon the audience that, you know, we've all benefited from this. So why are you going to punish the guy from whom you benefit? That's like hypocrisy. And he does it by putting the argument in Milo's mouth and not his own, by acting. So that was very clever. He lost that case, though. He lost. So yes, so the two emotions you want to evoke are pity and indignation. Pity and indignation. You want to create the appearance, in a criminal case, that, you know, your guy is a virtuous hero who's been laid low. He's cared about the community. He's done all these good things, and yet, innocent though he is, he's here before you. He has to suffer the ignominy of being accused of whatever crime it is. He's been put in prison away from his family. You feel sorry for the guy. That you want to feel sorry for the guy, or with the case of the immigration, you feel pity on the family. You feel pity on the guy's family who was murdered, and you just focus on that. And it's like you're basically saying to the mother, yeah, we don't care about you. We don't care that your son was killed if you keep supporting immigration. Okay. Lots of. You can have great fun with this. And so to summarize, there's a phrase: nothing dries quicker than a tear. So in your peroration and in your speech in general, you make your arguments. You can make the audience laugh, make the audience cry, make the audience angry, and then sit down before that emotion wears off. So we'll give it a break now. We'll come back in half an hour, so at 20 to 4, and we'll go on to the style of a speech, putting it into memory, and how to deliver it. Thank you.